Condoleezza Rice served as United States Secretary of State under George W. Bush. She was preceded by Colin Powell and followed by Hillary Clinton. As Secretary of State, she traveled widely and initiated many diplomatic efforts on behalf of the Bush administration. Confirmation hearings. On November 16, 2004, Bush nominated Rice to be Secretary of State. On January 26, 2005, the Senate confirmed her nomination by a vote of 85 to 13. The negative votes, the most cast against any nomination for Secretary of State since 1825, came from senators who, according to Senator Barbara Boxer, wanted to hold Dr. Rice and the Bush administration accountable for the failures in Iraq and in the war on terrorism. Quote, "The reasoning was that Rice had acted irresponsibly in equating Hussein's regime with Islamist terrorism, and some could not accept her previous record." Senator Robert Byrd voted against Rice's appointment, indicating that she has asserted that the president holds far more of the war power than the Constitution grants him. Staff. Rice's senior advisor was Shirana Tahir-Kali. Major initiatives. As Secretary of State, Rice championed the expansion of democratic governments. Rice stated that 9/11 was rooted in oppression and despair, and so, the U.S. must advance democratic reform and support basic rights throughout the Greater Middle East. Rice has also reformed and restructured the department, as well as U.S. diplomacy as a whole. Transformational diplomacy is the goal that Rice describes as work with our many partners around the world, build and sustain democratic, well-governed states that will respond to the needs of the people and conduct themselves responsibly in the international system. Rice's transformational diplomacy involves 5 core elements: relocating American diplomats to the places in the world where they are needed most, such as China, India, Brazil, Egypt, Nigeria, Indonesia, South Africa, and Lebanon. Requiring diplomats to serve some time in hardship locations such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Angola, gain expertise in at least 2 regions, and become fluent in 2 foreign languages, such as Chinese, Arabic, or Urdu, focusing on regional solutions to problems like terrorism, drug trafficking, and diseases, working with other countries on a bilateral basis to help them build a stronger infrastructure, and decreasing foreign nations' dependence on American handouts and assistance, creating a high-level position, Director of Foreign Assistance, to oversee U.S. foreign aid, thus defragmenting U.S. foreign assistance. Rice said that these moves were needed to help maintain security, fight poverty, and make democratic reforms in these countries, and would help improve foreign nations' legal, economic, healthcare, and educational systems. Another aspect of transformational diplomacy is the emphasis on finding regional solutions. Rice also pressed for finding transnational solutions as well, stating that, in the 21st century, geographic regions are growing ever more integrated economically, politically, and culturally. This creates new opportunities, but it also presents new challenges, especially from transnational threats like terrorism and weapons proliferation and drug smuggling and trafficking in persons and disease. Another aspect of the emphasis on regional solutions is the implementation of small, agile, rapid response teams to tackle problems like disease, instead of the traditional approach of calling on experts in an embassy. Rice explained that this means moving diplomats out of the back rooms of foreign ministries and putting more effort into localizing the State Department's diplomatic posture in foreign nations. The Secretary emphasized the need for diplomats to move into the largely unreached, bustling new population centers and to spread out more widely across countries in order to become more familiar with local issues and people. Rice restructured U.S. foreign assistance, naming Randall L. Tobias, an AIDS relief expert, as administrator of USAID. Tobias, as a Deputy Secretary of State, had the job of focusing foreign assistance efforts and defragmenting the disparate aid offices to improve effectiveness and efficiency. Rice says these initiatives are necessary because of the highly extraordinary time in which Americans live. She compares the moves to the historic initiatives taken after World War II, which she claims helped stabilize Europe as it is known today. Rice states that her transformational diplomacy is not merely about influencing or reporting on governments, but changing people's lives through tackling the issues like AIDS, the education of women, and the defeat of violent extremism. In early 2007, Rice indicated that State Department employees were volunteering in large numbers, yet Defense Secretary Robert Gates expressed concerns regarding a request from Rice that military personnel fill jobs in Iraq that are the responsibility of the State Department. Travels and aspirations. As of September 7, 2008, Secretary Rice has visited 83 countries, traveling for 2,118.19 hours over a total distance of 1,006,846 miles. On October 30, 2005, Rice attended a memorial service in Montgomery, Alabama, in Rice's home state, for Rosa Parks, an inspiration for the American civil rights movement. Rice stated that she and others who grew up in Alabama during the height of Parks's activism might not have realized her impact on the lives at the time. But I can honestly say that without Mrs. Parks, I probably would not be standing here today as Secretary of State. On October 1, 2007, Rice told children that she would not run for president, slept for 6.5 hours a night, and was not afraid of war zones. Asked how it felt to be a lady with such a powerful job, she said, "Sometimes you don't feel all that powerful." Wahida Charlie Rangel, who was visiting the school with Rice, teasingly suggested Rice aim for the White House. Middle East. Gaza withdrawal. Rice worked to persuade Israel to withdraw from Palestinian territories and free up commerce and travel between the two areas. During the summer of 2005, Rice encouraged Israeli leadership to withdraw from settlements in Gaza and the West Bank. Rice spent April 2005 raising support among Arab leaders. In July, she visited the region to help bring the weight of the United States to the discussions. In September, Rice hailed the successful withdrawal as a victory for both Israel and Palestine, saying, "This is a historic moment for both sides, and the commitment of both sides to a successful disengagement process has been impressive." Gaza is now under Palestinian control once again. However, Palestinians complained that they were not able to travel through border crossings in and out of Gaza, which had stifled commerce. Border crossings deal. In November 2005, Rice renegotiated an opening of the Gaza border crossings. Secretary Rice extended her visit to Jerusalem for a mediation session November 14, meeting alternately with Israel and Palestinian delegations. Rice negotiated differences between Israel and Palestine that included a proposed blacklist of Palestinians that had been detained by Israel and a concern that future violence would induce a renewed closure of the border crossings. By November 15, Rice announced an agreement to open Gaza's borders, with a system of transportation between Gaza and the West Bank, defining operations for transporting cargo and people across the border and allowing Gaza to reopen its international airport and begin work on a seaport. This included the Rafah border crossing, Palestine's only land linked to a country other than Israel. It also included monitoring of the crossings by officials from the European Union. Gideon Levy, reporter for an Israeli newspaper, complained Rice had accomplished little in what was considered the achievement of the current visit. Israel also promised to open the Karni crossing. Karni will be open, one can assume, only slightly more than the safe passage, which never opened following the previous futile visit. Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Rice pushed for peaceful, democratic elections in Palestine following the death of Yasser Arafat. Rice asserted that there should be the ability of Palestinian people to participate in the elections, and claimed that democratic elections would represent a key step in the process of building a peaceful, democratic Palestinian state. Rice, alluding to the U.S.-labeled terrorist organization Hamas, stated that there should be no place in the political process for groups or individuals who refuse to renounce terror and violence, recognize Israel's right to exist, and disarm, saying, "You cannot have one foot in politics and the other foot in terror." However, she said that holding the elections had been the right choice, even after Hamas' victory. Rice persuaded Israel to allow Israeli Palestinians in East Jerusalem to vote in the Palestinian Authority elections. Israel allowed Palestinians in East Jerusalem to vote in the January 25, 2006 parliamentary elections, while banning Hamas, which officially calls for Israelis' destruction, from campaigning there. Rice lauded the turnout and congratulated President Abbas, while informing the victorious Hamas that it would have to make some difficult choices, saying, "Those who win elections have an obligation to govern democratically." It now inherits the obligations of a Palestinian government authority that go back now for more than a decade to recognize the right of Israel to exist, to renounce violence, to disarm militias, as is the case in the roadmap, and to find a peaceful solution in two states. In response to the Hamas victory, Israel withheld funds belonging to the Palestinian Authority, and reinforced restrictions on movement in and out of the Gaza Strip and within the West Bank. Rice stated, "Clearly, cannot govern in a circumstance in which they cannot represent a responsible government before the international system." Quote, Rice told her Israeli counterpart that the economic boycott on the Hamas-led Palestinian government is effective, and in the international community will continue to maintain the boycott. George Soros faulted Rice for refusing to deal with Hamas. Progress is possible as long as the Bush administration and the Ehud Olmert government persist in their current position of refusing to recognize a unity government that includes Hamas. A recent meeting between Condoleezza Rice, Abbas, and Olmert turned into an empty formality, said Soros. This was playing into the hands of the hardliners in Hamas, increasing the influence of Syria and Iran, and would escalate the fighting, Soros said. Immediately following Hamas' victory in the elections, Rice attempted to garner international support in demanding that Hamas recognize Israel's right to exist. By April, Hamas officials appeared to publicly state that they are willing to work toward recognizing Israel. Under their terms, Israel would have to fully withdraw from occupied territories, including Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. Many saw this as a positive starting point for negotiations that would allow the roadmap process to continue. The statement was verified by Hamas leaders such as Mohammed Ghazal, a Hamas militia official, who stated that Hamas may be willing to amend its charter to recognize Israel, saying the charter is not the Quran. Ghazal went on to state that while he agreed with Hamas's positions, we're talking now about reality, about political solutions. The realities are different. Rice stated February 21, 2008 that Hamas rocket attacks against Israel need to stop. demanding an end to the escalating violence that has rocked the Gaza Strip and set back efforts of the United States to promote a Middle East peace deal. Rice arrived in Cairo, Egypt, March 4, 2008, in the latest diplomatic effort to revive a Middle East peace process sidetracked by violence between Israelis and Palestinians. Rice was scheduled to meet with Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak and Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert on March 5, 2008. In late December 2008, after Israel broke the Gaza Strip ceasefire with an incursion into the Gaza Strip, Rice kept outgoing President George W. Bush abreast of the situation. The United States strongly condemns the repeated rocket and mortar attacks against Israel and holds Hamas responsible for breaking the ceasefire, and for the renewal of violence in Gaza, Rice said in a statement. The ceasefire should be restored immediately. The United States calls on all concerned to address the urgent humanitarian needs of the innocent people of Gaza. Quote, in early January 2009, Rice went to New York and personally negotiated United Nations Security Council Resolution 1860 supporting a ceasefire, but then abstained on its 14-0 passage. Explaining the abstention, Rice said the U.S. wanted to first see the outcome of the Egyptian peace efforts, but allowed the resolution to go forward because it was a step in the right direction. Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert later claimed he humiliated Rice by persuading U.S. President Bush to instruct her not to vote for it. Rice spokesman Sean McCormack has called Olmert's claims 100% totally, completely not true, but on January 14, Olmert aides said the Israeli leader told the story as it happened. Olmert has also claimed that Bush broke off a speech he was giving in Philadelphia to take his call, and that the abstention embarrassed Rice. 2006 Israel-Lebanon conflict. In mid-July 2006, the Middle East peace process encountered a new obstacle on a different front when Hezbollah fighters from Lebanon launched rocket attacks into Israel and ambushed Israeli convoys, kidnapping 2 soldiers and killing 3, sparking what has become known as the 2006 Israel-Lebanon conflict. Rice immediately condemned the act, calling Hezbollah a terrorist organization, and saying that the action undermines regional stability and goes against the interests of both the Israeli and Lebanese people, specifically calling on Syria to use its influence to support a positive outcome. Quote, that day, Rice was one of the first to speak directly to UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, Lebanese Prime Minister Fouad Siniora and Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni concerning the incident. Israel initiated aerial bombardments against Lebanon on July 13 and sent in land troops on July 23 to take out rocket-launching sites that were shelling northern Israeli cities, as well as to look for and recover the 2 kidnapped Israeli soldiers. During the conflict, Rice supported Israel's right to defend itself from Hezbollah attacks. She repeatedly cautioned Israel to be responsible in minimizing collateral damage. Before the major fighting began, Rice demanded that both Israel and Lebanon act with restraint to resolve this incident peacefully and to protect innocent life and civilian infrastructure. Quote, she also continued to pressure Syria to take a more active positive role throughout the crisis, accusing Syria of sheltering the people who have been perpetrating these acts, and calling on it to act responsibly and stop the use of its territory for these kinds of activities, to bring all pressure on those that it is harboring to stop this and to return these soldiers and to allow the situation to be de-escalated. Quote, When Rice arrived in the Middle East in July 2006, one of her first moves was an unannounced visit to Lebanese Prime Minister Sinora to praise Sinora's courage and steadfastness, and show U.S. support for the Lebanese people. Rice stated that the conflict was part of the birth pangs of a new Middle East, stating that Israel, Lebanon, and the international community had to be certain that we're pushing forward to the new Middle East, not going back to the old one. At a time when progress appeared possible in the region, the Israeli military launched an airstrike on a suspected Hezbollah hideout in Qana, Lebanon, that killed 20 to 60 civilians. The airstrike seemed to sour support for Israelis' endeavor, and Lebanon cancelled the visit by Rice as a result. While the tragedy was a setback in the negotiation process, it seemed to be a turning point for Israel, who afterward began taking a path toward a ceasefire. Before Rice left the region on July 27, she was able to negotiate a 48-hour halt on Israeli air raids. Rice returned to the Middle East on July 29, when the outlines of the ceasefire to come began to take shape. Rice demanded that the global community do what it could to ensure that the Mideast region would never again return to the status quo ante. Rice saw the situation as an opportunity to create a new environment in which Israel and Lebanon could live in peace, and in which Lebanon could have full control over all its territories without Hezbollah acting as a state within a state, being able to launch terrorist attacks on Israel. Building on the two resolutions that came out of the G8 summit and the steps that had been taken at the conference in Rome, Italy in late July, Rice worked with other leaders at the United Nations to pass UN Security Council Resolution 1701 on August 11, 2006, which sought to resolve the crisis. The ceasefire went into effect on August 14. The ceasefire that Rice helped broker provided for a full cessation of hostilities, a Lebanese-led international force to take the place of the Israeli forces, the disarmament of Hezbollah, full control of the Lebanese government to Lebanon, and an absence of paramilitary forces south of the Litani River. It also emphasizes the need for the immediate release of the two kidnapped Israeli soldiers. Rice lauded the outcome and expressed pleasure that the hostilities in the area had been brought to an end, though there were sporadic, but small, spurts of violence after the ceasefire took effect. It has ultimately sustained, while international peacekeeping forces began to replace Israeli forces. On October 2, 2006, the last Israeli forces were withdrawn, allowing the UN and the Lebanese military to take over. She had a 30-minute meeting with Walid Muallim, her Syrian counterpart, on May 3, 2007, the first such talks at this level since 2005. Egypt. In February 2005, Rice abruptly postponed a visit to Egypt, reflecting displeasure at the jailing of a leading opposition figure. Ayman Noor, head of the Liberal Tomorrow Party, was reported to have been brutally interrogated. Noor was freed by Egyptian authorities in March 2005 and began a campaign for the Egyptian presidency. In June 2005, Rice addressed democracy in the Middle East at the American University in Cairo. She stated, "There are those who say that democracy leads to chaos, or conflict, or terror. In fact, the opposite is true. Ladies and gentlemen, across the Middle East today, millions of citizens are voicing their aspirations for liberty and for democracy, demanding freedom for themselves and democracy for the countries. To these courageous men and women, I say today, all free nations will stand with you as you secure the blessings of your own liberty." Noor finished second in Egypt's presidential race, held in 2005. In December 2005, Egypt imprisoned Noor on forgery charges that were disputed by human rights groups. In February 2006, Rice visited Hosni Mubarak yet never spoke Noor's name publicly. When asked about him at a news conference, she referred to his situation as one of Egypt's setbacks. Days later, Mubarak told a government newspaper that Rice didn't bring up difficult issues or ask to change anything. Mohammed Habib, an Egyptian Brotherhood official, stated, "Hamas's victory made the U.S. take a contrary position to promoting democracy in Egypt and favor a hereditary succession." In 2005, Egypt acknowledged that the U.S. had transferred 60 detainees to Egypt as part of the War on Terror. In 2007, Amnesty International reported that Egypt had become an international center for interrogation and torture for other countries. The second largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid is Egypt, with $1.8 billion scheduled for fiscal 2006. Edward Walker, former ambassador to Egypt, noted aid offers an easy way out for Egypt to avoid reform. They use the money to support antiquated programs and to resist reforms. Rice has worked in the Middle East, including Israel, the Palestinian territories, and its immediate neighbors, especially Lebanon. Rice has supported Israel, defended Israel's right to protect itself, and promoted the Roadmap for Peace, which includes the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state. On August 29, 2006, she stated that the Middle East should be a Middle East in which there is a Palestinian state in which Palestinians can have their own aspirations met, one that is not corrupt, one that is democratic, one in which there is only one authority: Saudi Arabia. In May 2005, Rice indicated that many Mideast states would have to answer the people's call for genuine reform. Quote, she said, "And even Saudi Arabia has held multiple elections." Quote, in April 2007, the New York Times reported that more than half the decisions made by the councils have not been carried out. Most of the others have been in support of the central government. In November 2005, the State Department issued a report critical of restrictions on religion in Saudi Arabia, noting among other things that all citizens were required to be Muslims. Rice has not sanctioned Saudi Arabia, saying she wants additional time for a continuation of discussions leading to progress on important religious freedom issues. Criticisms in the report include a 2002 incident in which Saudi religious police stopped students from leaving a burning building because they were not wearing mandated Islamic dress. 15 schoolgirls perished.